Hey Dragons, welcome back to Davis Reads. Today I'm going to read you a story called Springer's Journey. I'm going to start in the back of the book with the afterword. It says, this book is based on a true story. In it, we have been introduced to Springer, the orphaned orca. Far from family and home waters, Springer's lonely, solitary journey by chance brought her near Seattle, Washington in 2002, and in doing so, she found her way into our hearts. So it's kind of a sad story, talks about the orphaned orca who lost her mom, but I thought a lot of us have lost loved ones close to us, and so we can relate to her. But then down here it says, little Springer taught us all a valuable lesson in trust, and perhaps above all, trust that all of us, whether scientists, government officials, non-governmental organizations, or the public, can solve problems if we resolve to work together. And I thought that was so fitting with what we're doing right now. Your family, your school, and your community are working together. Our local, state, and federal governments are working together to solve this problem that we're in right now, right? I thought it was fitting. So here we go. Springer's Journey. In the cold, cold waters of the Pacific Ocean, in the deep kelp forest among the silly sea otters, a young orca whale named Springer lived with her family pod. Springer spent her days splashing and swimming with her mother and diving far down into the deep kelp forest, looking for tasty salmon to eat. One day, Springer's mother got very sick. Springer tried to help her, but nothing made her better. She just got more sick and more sick. On a bright and sunny winter morning, Springer's mother died. Springer missed her mother every day, and she was very, very sad. She wished she could have done something to make her mother better. Since she now had no mother to take care of her, Springer's aunts and uncles and cousins all watched over the young orca. But even though Springer loved her family pod, none of them was her mother. Springer visited the kelp forest often, for it reminded her of her mother, but each time she swam farther and farther away from her family. One day she swam so far away that she couldn't find her way back. She asked the 8-armed octopus for help. She asked the sleek spotted seal for help. She asked the thick-lipped cod for help, but no one knew the way home. She even asked the sea otters, but the sea otters are silly. They just kept on playing with their prickly sea urchin dinners. So Springer swam off to find her own way home. She swam for days and days all alone, past reefs and islands, through channels and inlets, through deep, swift water, until she came to a place that was noisy and strange. Do you recognize that? Have you been to Seattle? By now it was winter. Springer was tired and she didn't feel very well. There were lots of boats and lots of people, but not many salmon to eat. Springer grew very hungry. She didn't know where to go, and she missed her mother so very much. One day, a boat rowed up to her. Springer asked the boat if it knew the way back to the kelp forest, but it didn't. She asked another boat, then another, then another. Soon there were lots of boats, and Springer thought that one of them must know the way home, so she asked them every day, but none of the boats knew. Springer got more and more lonely, and more hungry. One afternoon, she set off to see the giant old ferry boat that slowly chugged its way back and forth across the water. She asked the wise old ferry boat if it knew the way to the kelp forest. Its big hinges creaked and groaned, and it told her that the journey was far too long for a little orca whale such as herself. Springer told the ferry boat about how much she missed her mother. She asked if it would be her mother so she wouldn't be so lonely. She decided to stay with the ferry boat and learn to be a boat instead of an orca whale. Springer swam back and forth with the ferry every day, learning schedules and routes and other things that ferry boats know. But the ferry boat didn't eat salmon as Springer did. And even though Springer was a little less lonely, she was still very, very hungry. The winter passed and the spring sun warmed the water. On a bright, cool morning, some small boats came to visit her and the old ferry. They said to Springer that all the boats had told her story to other boats, who had told it to other boats, who had told it to other boats. So everyone for miles and miles around knew about Springer, and everyone wanted to help her find her way home. Springer told the boats she was learning to be a fairy, so she couldn't go home. But the wise old ferry boat knew that whales can't be fairies, no matter how hard they try. She knew Springer had to find her way back to the kelp forest where her family pod lived. So Springer went off with the little boats to a floating pen near some docks. Springer was tired and sick and hungry because she hadn't eaten the ferry boat food or slept in a ferry boat bed. At the docks, many busy people did all sorts of busy people things. They weighed her in a big sling, they gave her medicine to help her feel better, and they petted her so she wouldn't feel so lonely. Springer talked to the people all the time, but they spoke in funny, tiny voices that she couldn't understand. Springer found lots of tasty salmon in the pen, so she ate and ate and ate until her belly was full and round. A few weeks passed and Springer started to feel better. She wasn't as hungry anymore, and she wasn't as sick. She thought more and more about home and how much she missed the kelp forest with its silly sea otters and the rest of her family pod. One morning, when the summer sun rose very early and the water was warm, a huge boat came to Springer's pen. It told her that the way back to the kelp forest had been found. It was there to take Springer home. The people put her in a big sling and raised her far, far above the water. Then they put her in a little tank just her size on the deck of the boat. The people kept cold water running in her little tank to keep her cool, and they stayed with her so she wouldn't be scared. Springer talked to the people as the boat traveled on its long journey. She told the people about her home. She told them stories about the 8-armed octopus and the thick-lipped cod. She told them about her family and the tasty salmon she liked. Most of all, she told them how happy she was to be going home. That afternoon, Springer started to get very hot because her little tank was too small to let her dive down into the water. She told the people she was getting too hot, so they put ice in her tank to make her feel better. That evening, the people took Springer to a little inlet with a floating pen in the cold, cold water. She swam happily around in the cool sunset and found lots of tasty salmon to eat. As dusk fell, she heard a faraway noise. Springer became very quiet and listened very, very hard. She called out and she heard a reply. It was her grandmother. Her grandmother was swimming by the inlet. She was home. Springer could hardly wait until she could go back to the kelp forest. She waited all night long, talking to her grandmother from her pen until dawn. As the morning's rays shimmered off the water, the floating nets were lowered. Springer said goodbye to the people as she swam excitedly off to see her family. She was so happy to see her grandmother and the rest of her family that she swam and splashed and turned round and round in the water. Springer squealed and squeaked and clicked in her orca voice, telling everyone she was home. She was home. Her grandmother was very serious. She told Springer that her mother had loved her very much and that Springer should never forget her, but all the orcas in her family pod would take care of her now. Springer knew that her mother was gone. She understood that her grandmother couldn't bring her mother back. Springer thought about her adventure. She thought about how hard it was to be a ferry boat and how tired and sick she had gotten. She thought about how happy she was to see her grandmother again and how much she missed the kelp forest. Now Springer and her grandmother and aunts and uncles and cousins and nieces and nephews and the rest of her family pod swim and dive together in the cold, cold waters off the Pacific Ocean, in the deep kelp forests among the silly sea otters. So even though this was a sad story at the beginning, it ended up pretty happy. And even though we're not at school having fun together right now, we're all working together and we're going to be back at school soon. So take care, dragons. Miss you.